So, I guess if I'm going through all of Avatar, I had to talk about this. So let's get this out of the way. Of all honesty, I'm really curious about how it feels now because I haven't seen this since I was a kid. I knew it was bad then, and I didn't want to touch it anytime now. But I'm really curious if I'll have a soft spot for it now as I did like the Death Note live action movie. Let's watch it and find out. Avatar: The Last Airbender was a Nickelodeon animated series created by Michael Dante Diamantino and Brian Konietzko. Avatar came out at this weird time in Nickelodeon where they weren't really having a lot of success with animated shows outside of SpongeBob and some shows created by a guy named Butch, and it was very left field for a Nickelodeon cartoon because it was more action-packed. But guess what? Because of its success, there was a live action movie created for it, and it was even directed and created by the one and only M. Night Shyamalan. I'm sure that says a lot about this movie as is, but maybe it doesn't. I'm more than positive now that it'll hold up. I'm more than positive now that I will definitely have a soft spot for this movie. Is this that M. Night Shyamalan movie? That's just very inappropriate. Can you not? M. Shaman? Dude, seriously, it's not cool. It's not cool at all. M. Shaquille O'Neal. Oh, God damn it, man. No, I do not have a soft spot for this movie at all. This movie is like everything and nothing all at the same time, and it's such a weird thing to sit through. By the way, I will be referring to these characters and some things as they're called in the film. I will not be referring to them as their canonical names because this movie just feels like it's in an entirely different dimension. So I'm just gonna say the names that are on here. Names such as Ong, the Avatar, Sokka, Acne Key, and the list goes on and on and on, including one of my favorites, Iroh. What I mean by this movie is everything and nothing at the same time. I mean that these characters are basically the same characters from the cartoon, but it feels like there's no motivation behind these characters. It feels like things just happen because it happened in a show, and it doesn't feel like these characters' motivations really drives them towards the next progression. It just kinda happens. I didn't want to be like everyone else and just talk down on this movie, but there's rarely anything to talk up to this movie about. The most positive thing I could say about this movie is that the setting looks amazing, most notably the Northern Water Tribe. It's almost a one-to-one replica of the show's version. And the fighting scenes that don't use the bending are actually really good and have the most character behind them than the actual bending battles. One of the main things wrong with this movie is that everybody takes themselves very seriously. It makes sense for Zuko and Katara's character to do so in this movie, but Sokka's character, whose name is Sokka, so I'm gonna call him Sokka, someone who was at times the comedy relief of the team, didn't say a single joke. Well, there was one attempt at one with him and Katara, but I think it really fell flat in this movie. This war was so hard on live action Sokka, he has lost all of his funny. Ong is very melodramatic, and I know Aang had times of that as well. Season 1 Aang felt like he still denied the fact that he was the Avatar. He knows he has duties to fulfill, but he still has childlike wonders and wants to have fun, wants to do his fun things first. In this movie, Aang doesn't want to be the Avatar. He says there was an acceptance ceremony, and once the bowing began, he ran away. But now he's back. If there's anything this movie does right, it's Aang's acceptance that he's the Avatar, the only one who can stop this war, and he had his first test at Haru's place. So remember the show, and this is that episode where the Firebenders were smart enough to hold these Earthbenders captive on a metal boat, so they would not be able to earthbend at all. Well, throw that completely out the window, just completely forget about that, because these Earthbenders are held captive on ground. They're on Earth. But at least Katara was able to give her a speech, right? So she could rally up these Earthbenders to revolt against that dastardly Fire Nation. Except Aang gave the speech, and the speech was more or less that he was the Avatar, and not more than like 2 minutes later, they were ready to revolt. And they all formed together in this great formation to throw one rock. One tiny, medium-sized little baby rock. There was like 10 of them in this formation. You have no idea how funny this was to me. It's so gold. It's genuinely such a good scene. The bending in this movie is so bad. Most live action adaptations of video games, anime, cartoons, they all have bad CG when it comes to them, which is why I developed a taste of adapting something more grounded to reality, but they profusely refuse to do so. Look at The Last of Us and how popular that adaptation became. It's because it's almost a one-to-one adaptation of something more grounded. Just meaning that there's no weird powers they'd had to animate that's very jarring in a movie compared to everything else. The bending moves so slow. I'm fine with them changing what physical motions people do to bend, but something is just so jarring when people are doing so much movement for one rock to do one motion moving by. Where in the show, one guy moves his arm one way, the bending of the rock goes the same direction. It was that simple. Why couldn't they have done that? Bending is supposed to be a part of them. They are supposed to use it as an expression of their character, not as a weapon they happen to stumble upon. I think the hand-to-hand fight scenes in this film help with that a lot more than the bending does. Speaking of bending, I do have a question. Why can't the firebenders produce fire? I feel like that was an integral part of the show that they just completely outdone. They can only move fire now, similar to how earthbenders and waterbenders move earth and water near them. That's the only thing firebenders can do in this movie. And the main reason I'm not okay with this is because they had to change a lot of scenes and have like different fire lamps and stuff around because they can only move fire. But it makes no sense, because if this is a 100-year war and it's been going on for such a long time, shouldn't people have known to get rid of any fire that was in their hometown so the firebender would have no ammunition at all? Just a thought. Iroh was literally the only person in this film that was able to produce his own fire because he was, filled with anger enough to do so. And Zhao and the rest of the Fire Nation soldiers, they were scared. They were feared for their life because they have never seen somebody produce their own fire like this. He's some sort of magic man now. Like, what the heck? How can he do this? It's such a weird concept not to just have them produce their own fire. Because this is a movie and they can't go to every village and town they visited in the show, things get mashed together. Maybe some might say J-mashed together. After they save Haru and his people, they take Onga then to the statue of Kyoshi that's at their place, so there's no Kyoshi warriors, there's no Kyoshi islands, there's no Suki. And they also give Katara the waterbending scroll, so there's no the waterbending scroll episode. Oh no pirates, I'm so sad about that. And I think that's the main issue with this movie. It feels like it has to touch upon certain plot points from the show to be considered an Avatar movie, but by touching upon those plot points, they don't do anything to these characters besides that. They just touch on them. It feels like someone read Spark Notes of the show and just made a semi-budgeted YouTube fan film based on that. Before we go to the Northern Water Tribe, there were a few key points that couldn't be skipped over, so I guess we'll have to talk about them now. Specifically, the Northern Air Temple and the Blue Spirit, which somehow they made flow together pretty decently after a lot of changes. After trying out the moves for the Waterbending Scroll, Ong was a bit peeved because he wasn't getting it immediately, unlike his counterpart in the show, so he snuck off to the Northern Air Temple for a little bit of, snooping around. There he saw this old man from an unknown Earth Kingdom colony saying he goes there to clean up every now and then, to look around the abandoned place from time to time. Now, if you are familiar with the show, you know people are supposed to be living here. People who aren't air nomads, but have made living there their own and glide around like they're one. It's supposed to be a little bit of a growing journey for Aang's character, but we get none of that. We just have this old man who cleaves around, shows Aang a room that was preserved. It was a temple with all the Avatar statues. They say Avatar. I have a problem. I can't say Avatar. It doesn't roll off the tongue. How did they say that? I have no doubt that each temple probably had one of these in them, but in the show, it was the Southern Air Temple where Aang was from that we first saw one of these there, but it wasn't there in this movie, so it's just a bit confusing as to why they moved it to the Northern Air Temple instead of the Southern Air Temple, but I guess, what they do next explains why they did that. The boy got ambushed and captured by Zhao. Zhao and Zuko are probably the best characters in this movie. If these movies did continue at the time, I could see Zuko easily being the star of them by the end, but This is where we get the Blue Spirit episode, and out of everything shown so far in this movie, this is almost played one-to-one with how the show portrayed it, all the way down to Aang saying it was Zuko, but still saving him. So it's one of the best parts of the movie, honestly. And now we get to the Northern Water Tribe, which again is played pretty similar to the show. A lot of the dramatics of this part was taken out though, so Paku, from what we saw, didn't teach Katara, also didn't really seem sexist like he did in the show, and Yue's father isn't alive in this version, so there's no betrothed storyline going on. So her sacrifice at the end does seem a little bit meaningless compared to the show. In the show, it was supposed to represent her finally having the opportunity to stand up and make a decision for herself, because she has had no say in the moon spirit healing her. She had no say on what she was to do with her life, who she was to marry. It was her moment to finally become her own person. And a little of that theme is still there in here because, you know, she was brought up in this world by the moon spirit, but it's nowhere nearly as strong as it is in the show. The rest was played pretty much similar to how the finale was played in the show, except there was no giant ocean spirit. The bending still looked pretty awful, except for like this one part towards the end where Zhao did a pretty decent fireball and Aang had a pretty decent sequence going past all the Fire Nation soldiers. And then we wasted the rest of the budget for this movie in one last giant god-awful CGI wave. They just had to give us one last big hurrah wave at the end. I think this movie could have been something cool if more time was done to revive the script to be more adapted to the big screens, and the CGI just didn't look god awful. It would have made more sense of them to do an animated movie because it wouldn't have to look god awful for one, and it could have been its own standalone thing, and they wouldn't have to have put so much money in the budget. How did this movie have such a successful return? I will never know. I said this in the last video that I'm surprised that Avatar wasn't milked for what it's worth, but I think they were trying to with this movie, and I'm saying that for two reasons. One, Azula showed up at the end, so there was obviously supposed to be a sequel or two, right? And two, Ozai told Zhao that Sozin's comet was in 4 years from then, and that's where they would have won the war, which makes me believe that this movie was going to have sequels for the next 4 years running until the story concluded. Or else, why would they make the change that the comet was coming 4 years from then instead of the end of the summer like it was in the show? I think I feel bad though, not for talking down on this film, but for the actors. It's clear that they have some talent in them, or else they would have continued to get work up to this day, besides the person who played Aang, who just disappeared from the map apparently. But yeah, I just feel bad. No one really fits the characters they're portraying. It's the whole square shape and the round hole metaphor. They were forced to fit these roles, and these directions made it even worse. From the mispronouncing of a lot of names to everything just feeling like it has no emotion in it. I'm so curious though, really still super curious about how this Netflix series will look. It could be really good, it could be really bad. We know where the bar is, so it's probably gonna exceed this bar more than likely. So only high hopes for this Netflix series, more than high hopes for these animated films and new animated series is coming out. I genuinely can't wait. Legend of Korra is next. I'm so excited to start watching Legend of Korra. I've actually already seen a few episodes and I do like it. But yeah, that's basically it. I'll see each and every one of you around next time. Okay, goodbye.